Hi, this is Michelle from Michelle Abel's Gaming, and welcome to week 2 of the Super Famicom Challenge. So, this week we have some new games, some new strategy guides, a Super Famicom Halloween Challenge, and a brand new capture card. So, I hope you enjoy it. Sit back, let's go. I want to start off by showing you some new games that we've got that are going to be a part of the challenge, and then we're going to move on to my Halloween pick. So, I grabbed some games over the weekend that I'm going to add to the challenge. The first is Doraemon 4. Now, I mentioned Doraemon 3 in the introduction video, but I went ahead and got all of the others. So we have Doraemon 4, Doraemon 2, and Doraemon 1. These are all sort of platforming games, although the first two have an overworld map like RPGs. Also, we have a game called Malfound Stories. It took me a long time to figure out if that was an F or a R in there. I don't know. It's called Malfound Stories, and apparently it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up type game. It looked really cute, so I decided to give it a try. Next, we have a very classic here, the very first Goemon game for the Nintendo 64. Super Nintendo. Yes, so this is the first Goemon game in the series for Super Nintendo. There's at least 4 of them, I think. I don't think there's more than that on the Super Nintendo. But this is the one that made it to America, the only one of the Super Famicom games that made it to America. And it's a pretty good one. It's also one of the only ones I didn't have in Japan. Next is Aretha 2, the sequel to the RPG Aretha, which I have. So now we can play both of them. After that, we have Mystic Art, which is kind of a semi-well-known RPG from Enix, which I don't believe ever made it to America, although I do think there is a fan translation. And last of the new games, we have this Ranma 1/2 fighting game. There's several of these, and this is one of the better ones, if I remember correctly. To add to this, we have some strategy guides. So here we have the Part 1 and 2 strategy guides for Dragon Quest 1 and 2. Now this is for the Game Boy Color version, but as they're very, 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 very similar to the Super Nintendo version, I decided we could use this for the actual challenge. Also, we have the strategy guide for the first Doraemon game, which gives you some information about the game, has some maps and things. It's pretty cool. Especially when you see just how big the overworld map is. Town and everything like that. Also, a strategy guide for light fantasy. And kind of a light-looking RPG. Next, we have the original strategy guide for Final Fantasy IV, which I also have the strategy guide for Final Fantasy V, so that'll help us out quite a lot. And last, and this is the big one, it is the strategy guide for Sho Makaimura, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. So this hopefully will help me beat this super challenging, super difficult game. So now let's move on to the fun Halloween part. Super Castlevania IV. So, here it is, my Halloween game of choice. Super Castlevania IV. So, this is the American version of Castlevania IV, and I've chosen to play it instead of the Japanese version. And the reason is because my friend is currently borrowing the Japanese version, so I'm hoping that he will try and beat it too. I chose it partly because, while I have Dracula XX, this was easier, something I knew I could beat and get out of the way, and also just because there's a lot of things that I want to talk about with this game. It's not a terrible game, but it's also not my favorite, and there's some specific reasons why that I wanted to go into with you. So, sit back and enjoy the spooky ride. So, one of the first things I'd like to point out is this game's gimmicks. Now, it's important to note that this is one of the very first in the early Super Nintendo games, the very first for the series, Castlevania, really only one of 2 Castlevania games, but it was also attempting very hard to show off the system's capabilities. And as you see here, you have Simon, who is capable of moving between the foreground and the background. Now, this seems like a very simple point today, but at the time, it was a huge deal. Mario also did the same thing, having you switch between the front of a fence or the back of a fence. This game chooses to do similarly, although it's a side-scroller without climbing on the fence. So, the way it goes about it is a little bit different. So the first problem that you'll see with this game is that it's just too easy. This is the first boss, and while first bosses are usually pretty easy, and yes, I am taking some hits here because I kind of just don't care, you can see this boss just goes down far, far too easy. And many of the other bosses also go down easily. Not all, but a lot of them, fortunately. So let's address problem 2. As you can see from this map, this game looks fairly long. But the problem is that that's not the only map. You see, after stage 6 you realize that you've only just now gotten into the castle. And there are maybe 5 or 6 more levels after that, making this quite an annoyingly long game at times. So now we'll talk about the next gimmick, and this is kind of a big one. It's these hooks. So you can use these hooks to swing back and forth, and you can also lower and raise your height on the chain. And this becomes a major point at certain places in the game. In this part of the game, it's just to get across gaps, as you will see here. You have to jump across. Also, you can do the sort of light swooshing of the whip, which is a nice gimmick, but again, we come back to the problem of the whip just being way too overpowered. You see, I just picked up a sub-weapon, but for the most part, sub-weapons are kind of worthless, because your whip is so long, and you don't really need it. With all the different directions your whip can go, why bother with sub-weapon? At this point, the game really tries to throw some gimmicks at you. It wants to show you just what the Super Nintendo system can do, and so it does. Using all the Mode 7 graphics that it has in its capabilities, it rotates the entire screen. Now this is a really cool concept, but the problem is that the way the system handles it is not that great. So instead you end up sitting there forever, waiting for the thing to rotate, only to have it stop, and really all you're doing is just what you've always done in other Castlevanias. Fight some Medusa heads, except this time you're stuck on a small platform. In this case, the gimmick isn't actually doing anything to your gameplay. The gimmick itself is just something you sit there and watch happen. During the gameplay, all you're doing is standing on a platform fighting Medusas, so it's nothing new in that sense. There's not really even a gimmick to getting out of it either. Other than just being on the hook, the game actually puts these platforms for you to jump across. So there's no puzzle to it, there's no challenge to it, it just looks cool, basically just to look cool. And that's where you get some problems with this game, as you'll see from the next area. So here we are again. Another really awesome graphic, another really great gimmick, although it does slow the game down some. We see Mode 7 graphics allowing you to scroll the background while also stretching it. This looks really cool, but if you look at the level itself, it's nothing but a few little platforms that you just walk across. Sure, enemies drop down, but they're dropping down from the background. And I guess that's cool, but there's no challenge to it. It doesn't affect the gameplay in any way. It's just a gimmick for the gimmick's sake. If you look around you, there's nothing particularly difficult or interesting actually going on here. Pausing the game, you see that this is just a background, and really nothing more. Yes, the enemies fall from the background, but what are they doing other than that? They're just skeletons kind of walking around. It's not really that interesting, ultimately. Although it does, again, look really cool. I just wish that they had implemented it better with the rest of the gameplay. Now, let's talk about a good point in this game. This boss is actually really cool. Now, he's a little bit challenging for kind of stupid reasons because you're not really given a good opportunity to duck or dodge. But visually, it's a really neat idea. And I love the way he dies when he dies, which I don't know if you're going to see that because I don't think I actually beat him in this particular run. But it's just a cool boss. As you can see, there's a green platform on the left. Watch what happens when I jump onto it. The same also happens when I fall onto it. Now, let's watch the next block. So here, I'm about to make the jump. I fall down after having let that heart fall. And then, in slow motion, you can see that I jump across to this silver block here. Now what you can see here is I have actually touched on the silver block. At this point my foot is firmly on the silver block and is at least 1 pixel away from the green platform. At this point the animation moves from the falling animation to the walking animation, and I continue onward. Now the green platform is not supposed to register anything but a falling or a jumping. However, as a kid, I remember seeing this room in a guide that also included information about Super Metroid. However, I didn't own the game. I remember seeing a picture of this room and thinking it was so cool, but I didn't know what it was about, and it talked about going to fight Dracula. So I thought that you actually fought Dracula here on this ledge after having come down from the stairs above. I was completely wrong. What I learned only this week is that there's actually a secret here that makes it easier to fight Dracula. If you jump across here, there are invisible platforms, and 99 hearts and sub-weapon upgrades will drop down. So this makes it much easier to fight Dracula. However, fighting Dracula here would have been pretty cool. The part you've wanted to see, the battle with Dracula. Honestly, this isn't a particularly challenging or particularly interesting Dracula battle. It can be fairly easy if you really know the pattern, although it's not 100% easy. Unfortunately for him, his bullets are kind of easy to attack and knock out of the way for a lot of them. Not all of them. Sometimes they break into fours when you hit them, and then that becomes a bit of a problem. But in a lot of situations, you can just swing at them and break his bullets, which is a bit of an oversight. He does, however, have this little challenging thing. However, afterwards it drops wall meat, which makes it even easier. Granted, you still have to actually hit it, but you have to ask yourself, why did they make it so easy? Now, the fireballs are actually somewhat challenging. The moment you hit them, they fall down and can easily hit you. It's hard to dodge them sometimes, and that makes it a problem. But if you don't hit them, they're stationary, and then you don't really have much of a problem at all. It's easy to hit them in the head, and if you use the cheat, which you don't really need to, but if you have used the cheat, you've got so many hearts and so many cross-arraying, boomerang things that Dracula's kind of a wimp in this case. However, the game does do something pretty cool in that part of the way through the battle with Dracula, he has a transformation kind of thing, like usual, except it's not really a full transformation. But to make it more interesting, the game goes back and pulls the theme of Simon, which is the opening theme song for the game, just to give you that added feeling of you are in awesome mode. Of course, the problem again here is that this part is just too easy. It's not very hard to get out of the way of these laser blasts, and if you've got the cross, you can just spam it on him. All you really have to do is make sure you're not standing in a stupid place. And basically, he's gonna die. Also, I'm not really sure if he's wearing a mask here that's supposed to look like Nosferatu, or if that's just his real face. Either way, with very little effort, he's dead. Although his death is pretty interesting as the window breaks open and sunlight streams in. It's a nice touch for a fairly easy Dracula battle. One last bat falls to the ground and dies. The end. This has been Super Famicom Challenge Week 2. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.